It was just another quiet night shift at the amusement park. Same rides, same tools, same silence. But that night, something changed between me and the man I'd worked beside for months. And it all started under the Ferris wheel. The park had long since emptied, the last echoes of laughter and distant screams from the roller coasters fading into the night air. Neon lights blinked quietly in the distance, casting soft glows onto empty walkways littered with bits of confetti and paper cups. A soft breeze stirred the flags that lined the ticket booths, and somewhere deeper in the grounds, a motor hummed in steady rhythm. Aaron stood near the back gate, where the service building opened up onto the maintenance area. He had already changed into his usual work gear: heavy-duty pants, worn boots, and a navy jacket with a patch that had long since lost its color. The air smelled faintly of machine oil, fried food, and damp metal. Night shifts had their own rhythm, quieter, slower, but never idle. There was always something that needed checking, adjusting, or quietly fixing before the crowds returned the next day. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Raphael had arrived just 15 minutes earlier. The new guy, fresh face, former mechanic, according to the brief note HR had passed along. Aaron hadn't expected much. People came and went in this job more than most. The hours weren't glamorous, and the pay didn't exactly make up for the grease under the fingernails or the hours spent bent over fuse boxes. But Raphael had surprised him. He was already rolling a tool cart across the pavement when Aaron returned from the electrical shed, broad-shouldered, focused, and oddly calm for someone on his first night. His hands moved like they'd been trained for this kind of work, not flashy, not rushed, but with a kind of muscle memory that said he'd done it 100 times elsewhere. They hadn't spoken much, just introductions, the usual safety reminders, and a rundown of what needed attention. The tilt-a-whirl had a faulty lock on one of the control panels. The bumper cars had been tripping the main circuit again. Nothing serious, but enough to fill a long shift. Aaron preferred it this way: quiet, functional, efficient. And Raphael didn't seem to mind. They moved together through the park like shadows, each with a flashlight in hand, their footfalls muffled on the asphalt. When they reached the tilt-a-whirl, Raphael crouched down without a word, inspecting the latch with a practiced eye. Aaron watched for a moment, noting how the man's dark hair caught the lamplight, how the muscles in his forearms flexed slightly under the sleeves of his shirt. He looked away quickly, focusing instead on the control box nearby. Time passed in comfortable silence. Tools clicked, metal shifted, the wind moved overhead. Aaron found himself stealing glances as they worked side by side. There was something grounded about Raphael. He didn't fidget, didn't chatter to fill the quiet. His energy was steady, like the machines they maintained, complex yet stable. It was rare to meet someone who didn't feel the need to impress on the first night. After finishing with the tilt-a-whirl, they moved on to the bumper cars. Raphael pushed the breaker back into place with one firm motion, and the system lights flickered to life in a soft hum of electricity. Aaron nodded in approval, though he said nothing. Raphael met his gaze for a second, just enough to acknowledge the shared satisfaction of a job done right, then turned back to organize the tools without a word. It struck Aaron how easy the silence had become. Usually, working with someone new brought small talk, forced jokes, or awkward pauses. But with Raphael, the quiet wasn't empty. It was mutual, understood, like they were both tuned to the same frequency. The hours slipped by. Midnight passed. The wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves through the alley between two tall rides. Somewhere far off, a bell rang out from a forgotten kiosk, blown by the breeze. They took a break near the maintenance shed, sitting on a low bench beneath the Ferris wheel. The massive structure loomed above them, lights off, still and quiet. From this angle, it looked almost abandoned, eerie and beautiful at once. Raphael leaned back slightly, one arm resting behind him, his other hand cradling a bottle of water. Aaron sat forward, elbows on knees, watching the faint mist rise from his breath in the cold. He didn't usually sit like this with coworkers. Breaks were meant for checking notes, logging work, prepping the next task. But something about tonight was different. Slower. He could feel Raphael's presence beside him, not in an intrusive way, but as something solid, steady, real. The moment hung in the air like static before a storm. Nothing had happened, and yet Aaron felt that something already had. When the break ended, they stood together and walked back toward the next task. No words were needed. They both knew what came next. Another ride to check. Another hour to pass. But as they moved through the sleeping park, Aaron felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not tension, not discomfort, just a quiet, growing awareness. Of the man walking beside him. Of the way their footsteps matched. Of how night, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel lonely. The second night began like the first, quiet and without fanfare. The crew had cleared out hours earlier, the last of the ride operators heading for the employee lot under dim floodlights. The sky had that thick, inky texture only clear nights could bring, and the stars blinked faintly above the flickering light bulbs that lined the roof of the carousel. Aaron arrived early, as usual. He preferred those 10 or 15 minutes of solitude before the shift officially began. It gave him time to check the logs, sort the toolkits, and step into the rhythm of the night before anyone else could disrupt it. But Raphael arrived not long after, his gait steady, his steps unhurried. There was something about the way he entered a space, never rushed, never drawing too much attention, but somehow anchoring everything around him. He gave a nod in Aaron's direction, a silent greeting they both seemed to favor, then slipped into his work gloves without a word. They started near the back of the park, where one of the concession booths had lost power. It wasn't urgent, just a faulty connection in the wiring under the panel. Raphael volunteered to crawl beneath while Aaron monitored the fuses above. A quiet buzz filled the space, and in between bursts of light from Aaron's flashlight, he caught brief glimpses of Raphael working, focused, precise, calm. At one point, Raphael reached up to hand him a wire connector, and their fingers brushed. It was nothing. A second, maybe less. But Aaron's hand hesitated just a moment longer than necessary, and when he pulled back, he could still feel the ghost of that touch. They didn't speak about it. They didn't speak much at all. By the time they moved on to the carousel, the park had fallen into complete stillness. The horses gleamed faintly under the ambient lights, their painted eyes frozen mid-gallop, silent spectators to the unfolding tension neither man dared to name. Raphael knelt beside the motor housing, wiping dust from the metal casing, while Aaron stood nearby, coiling a thick cable around his arm. It wasn't the work that made Aaron feel uneasy. It was the awareness that had crept in, quiet and uninvited. The sense that every movement, every pause, now carried something unspoken. He was attuned to Raphael in a way he couldn't explain, watching how his shoulders moved as he worked, how he paused briefly after completing a task, as if listening to the night itself. Later, they returned to the bench beneath the Ferris wheel for a break. The ride towered above them in perfect stillness, its massive arms casting slow shadows across the ground. Aaron sat first, elbows on his knees, palms together. Raphael followed, stretching his legs in front of him, eyes tilted upward toward the stars. The silence between them was not awkward, but it was charged, like something weighted just beyond the reach of language. Aaron felt it every time he exhaled, every time Raphael shifted slightly beside him. They hadn't touched again since the earlier moment beneath the booth, but the memory lingered, pulsing faintly just beneath the surface. It wasn't just physical awareness. It was something deeper, an emotional weight that Aaron hadn't expected to carry. He wasn't a man prone to sudden realizations or dramatic shifts, but something about Raphael's presence disrupted the usual flow of his thoughts, made him question things that had once seemed so certain. They eventually rose and returned to the night's checklist, recalibrating sensors near the log flume, testing lights on the swinging pirate ship. Tasks that would normally pass without notice now unfolded with a strange sense of gravity. Every shared look, every handoff of a tool, seemed to hum with restrained energy. At one point, Raphael climbed the ladder to adjust a jammed light fixture, and Aaron instinctively reached out to steady the base. His hand met Raphael's ankle briefly, skin against skin just above the sock line, and the contact, though small, jolted through him like static. When Raphael climbed down, neither of them spoke. But Aaron caught the faintest glance, brief, searching, unreadable. The shift ended around 3 a.m. They packed up the toolkits in silence and locked the maintenance gate behind them. The lot was empty, and their cars sat side by side beneath a flickering light. Aaron paused before unlocking his door, fingers resting on the handle. Raphael stood a few feet away, looking up at the sky as if unsure whether to say something or let the moment pass. In the end, no words came. Only a nod, slow, deliberate, from Raphael. Aaron returned it with the same restraint. But as he drove away, the image stayed with him. The silhouette of a man standing under the Ferris wheel, hands in his pockets, still and waiting. And something in Aaron told him this wasn't just another shift. Not anymore. A chill settled over the park that night. Not the sharp kind that bit at the skin, but the subtle cold that crept in slowly, gathering in the folds of jackets and behind the ears. The sky was unusually clear for late autumn, exposing a sweep of stars above the darkened skyline. The park lights had been dimmed after closing, leaving only emergency bulbs and a few maintenance lamps glowing like fireflies across the empty grounds. Aaron checked the clipboard one last time before heading out from the equipment shed. Most of the maintenance list had been cleared, but one note remained. The Ferris wheel's motion sensors had been acting up again. It wasn't urgent, but it couldn't wait another day. And with Raphael already heading in that direction, there was no reason to put off. The ride loomed in the distance, its circular frame outlined faintly in rust and light. From afar, it looked like it had been caught mid-breath, paused between motion and rest. Aaron made his way across the cracked pavement, the toolkit bumping against his leg with each step. Raphael stood at the base of the structure, looking upward. His jacket collar was pulled tight, one hand braced against the metal support beam. He didn't turn when Aaron approached, but he didn't need to. There was something about the stillness of his posture that spoke enough. Together, they worked in silence. Aaron opened the side panel near the ride's control box, while Raphael took to checking the connections above. The two-way radios crackled occasionally with static, but neither man used them. Their communication had long since settled into gestures, looks, and an unspoken rhythm that made language feel optional. After a while, Aaron climbed the short set of metal stairs to inspect the upper mechanism, only to hear a low metallic groan overhead. He looked up just as the Ferris wheel gave a slight jolt, then stopped. The platform beneath his feet vibrated, then stilled. A glance to his right confirmed it. Raphael was already stepping into one of the gondola seats, testing the cabin's locking arm. And then the lights blinked, not fully out, but flickering, enough to cause everything to dim briefly before humming back to life. It was a quirk in the breaker system they hadn't fully resolved, and now, for a moment, the world paused. Aaron found himself inside one of the gondolas as the ride shuddered, then began to move with a slow, creaking groan. Not fast, just enough to lift him and Raphael into the air, unplanned, unprompted. The controls must have shorted, and now the wheel moved on its own, one slow rotation that neither of them could stop. As the gondola climbed, the view expanded. The park below turned into a patchwork of lights and shadow. The city blinked on the horizon. Everything felt distant, smaller somehow. Inside the cabin, the silence was almost complete. Aaron sat opposite Raphael, the bench seat cool beneath him. The gondola swayed gently in the breeze, and the metal joints creaked with each shift. Neither man spoke. Words would have been too loud, too sharp against the soft hum of the night. Aaron let his eyes settle on Raphael. The shadows played across his features, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw, the slight furrow in his brow. He wasn't smiling, but there was a softness in his expression, something reflective, something open. The gondola reached the top and paused. For a moment, they hovered above everything. Just the two of them suspended in a metal cradle, surrounded by stars. Aaron looked away, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. The air felt thinner here, or maybe it was just his breath catching in his throat. His hands rested on his knees, fingers curled slightly inward. He could feel the energy between them, quiet, patient, and unmistakably alive. There was no movement, no sudden shifts, just presence. And in that moment, the silence said everything. It wasn't about drama or declarations. It wasn't about crossing lines. It was about recognition of something shared, something forming gently, steadily, with no need to force its way into the light. The Ferris wheel groaned again, beginning its descent. Raphael leaned back slightly, his eyes still distant. Aaron noticed the way his hand rested against the window ledge, relaxed now, less guarded. As they reached the ground, the wheel halted with a mechanical sigh. The lights flickered again, this time stabilizing. Neither man moved immediately. Eventually, Raphael stood and stepped out of the gondola. Aaron followed. They walked together across the empty plaza, the Ferris wheel silent behind them. Nothing had been said, but everything had changed. The park was nearly silent by the time their shift ended. Only a few lights remained on, casting long, soft shadows across the empty walkways. Somewhere far off, a mechanical timer clicked, shutting down another section of overhead lighting. The hum of generators slowed. The wind moved more freely through the structures, whispering through the spaces where, hours earlier, voices and music had filled the air. Aaron stood in the break room with the door slightly ajar, wiping down a wrench that didn't need cleaning. The night had passed in a blur, tasks completed, minor issues resolved, but his mind had stayed elsewhere. Up in that gondola, in the space between silence and awareness. In a look Raphael had given him just before they stepped off the ride, as if some question had been asked and almost answered. Raphael appeared a few minutes later, the sound of his boots against the concrete floor a steady rhythm that grounded the stillness. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked to the locker bench, took off his gloves, and sat down slowly. His shoulders slouched slightly, not with exhaustion, but with something heavier, something thoughtful. They remained like that for a while. Two men, alone in a space meant for function, surrounded by tools, spare parts, and the smell of grease and dust. The air was warm from the heater that clicked softly in the corner, but Aaron felt a chill run through him anyway. Not from cold, but from anticipation. Eventually, Raphael looked up. His eyes didn't search the room. They found Aaron directly, calmly. Aaron paused in his motion, the cloth in his hands now forgotten. Still, no words. Instead, Raphael stood again, walked toward the small sink in the corner, and ran water over his hands. The sound was steady, like rainfall in a quiet forest. It filled the silence with just enough presence to give them both space to think. When he turned off the faucet, the silence returned, heavier than before. Aaron placed the wrench on the counter. His fingers trembled slightly, though there was no visible cause for it. He felt like he was standing on a threshold, something about to be said or revealed, something that had been held back for far too long. Then Raphael stepped forward, not close enough to invade space, but near enough that Aaron could feel the heat of his presence. No longer just a co-worker, no longer just a shadow in the peripheral. His voice, when it came, was low, unhurried, waited. Aaron didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. Everything he felt had already been written into the silence between them. In the glances, in the stillness of shared breath, in the shift that had taken place beneath the stars. Instead, he let his shoulders drop, exhaling slowly. The wrench, the sink, the checklist, all faded into the background. There was no rush now, no need for conclusions. Just this, two men standing in a room that smelled like oil and steel, carrying something fragile between them. Something born not from bold declarations, but from long nights, flickering lights, and the way one man's quiet steadiness had slowly started to change the other. Aaron reached for the light switch and dimmed the overheads until only the soft glow of the corner lamp remained. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of honesty, of simplicity, of letting something delicate live without pressure. Raphael didn't step closer. He didn't need to. He just remained there, present, seen. And in that moment, Aaron finally let himself feel it, fully, without resistance. He wasn't afraid of what came next. The next shift began like any other. Same clipboard, same keys in the lock, same hum of old fluorescent lights flickering to life in the break room. But something in the air felt different now. Less tense, more open. The silence that had once been filled with hesitation now seemed to breathe easier. Aaron stood by the open door, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, watching as the sky deepened into its nightly blue. The lights of the Ferris wheel blinked on, one section at a time, casting pale circles onto the concrete below. A breeze moved through the empty park, stirring flags and forgotten napkins. Raphael arrived 5 minutes early. Not surprising anymore. His footsteps had become familiar. The sound of his approach, something Aaron found himself waiting for without realizing it. They exchanged a glance. No awkwardness, no tension. Just quiet acknowledgement. The kind that said, yes, something happened. And no, we're not pretending it didn't. They moved through their tasks with the ease of experience. Fixing a faulty water valve behind the snack stand. Checking the ride sensors on the spinning swings. Coiling cables and tightening bolts. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. The difference wasn't in the work. It was in the pauses. The way Raphael's shoulder brushed Aaron's as they bent over the same panel. The way their hands hovered just a moment longer when passing a wrench. The way Raphael sometimes looked at Aaron, not searching but steady, not wondering but sure. They didn't talk about what had happened in the break room, not with words, but the understanding between them had settled into something tangible. Something lived in the space between movement and stillness, in the way one man breathed near another without needing to explain why. During their break, they sat on the same bench beneath the Ferris wheel. The sky above was darker than usual, and the stars were brighter, clearer. Raphael leaned back slightly, his arm resting along the top rail of the bench. Aaron sat close, not touching, but close enough to feel the shared warmth. Neither man looked at the other, but both felt the nearness. Aaron let his head fall back against the wood. The cold slipped into the collar of his jacket, but he didn't mind. The stillness felt full, like something had finally found its place. Not because of a moment, but because of many moments layered gently over time. Later that night, they worked in the maintenance shed reorganizing tools, an excuse to linger indoors. Raphael stood beside the shelves, sorting fuses into neat rows. Aaron adjusted a storage drawer, then paused as their hands met briefly over the same container. They didn't pull away. Aaron looked up, and this time, Raphael didn't look away. No words passed between them, but Aaron felt the answer settle quietly inside him. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, earned, and true. They stayed there for a while, not working, not thinking, just being. When the shift ended, the parking lot was still empty. The same flickering light buzzed overhead, casting long shadows behind their cars. But neither of them moved toward the doors immediately. Aaron leaned against the hood of his car, arms crossed loosely, watching as Raphael stood with his hands in his pockets. Eyes on the Ferris wheel now shut down for the night. Raphael stepped forward after a moment. Not too close, but close enough. Their shoulders nearly touched. And then, without ceremony, Aaron reached out. A simple gesture, nothing grand. Just his hand brushing gently against Raphael's, fingers curling softly until they met. Raphael didn't pull away. Their hands remained there, lightly held, under the yellow glow of the parking lot lamp. No one said anything, but it didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like the beginning of something.